So good afternoon. Thank you for being here. If you don't mind, I will speak in English so everyone can follow us. I hope it's not a problem. And at the end, if you want to join me and have my book, I will sign my book and we can interact, you can ask questions and so on. So let me introduce myself. I'm an Italian journalist. I'm an investigative journalist. I work for the Italian daily Il Fatto Quotidiano after working for 14 years for L'Espresso and La Repubblica. And I'm here with two important people, I would say, more important than me. And one is Stella Assange, who will connect via video link because she's not well, unfortunately. She really wanted to be here, but unfortunately, she has some health problem. And she is the wife of Julian Assange, and she has worked on the legal case of Julian Assange. And the WikiLeaks journalist, Joseph Farrell, who is here, and he has worked for WikiLeaks from the very beginning, since 2010, so a lot of work. And I have worked for my newspaper, not for WikiLeaks, from the very beginning as well, 2009, even before they published the famous video, Collateral Murder, which make them famous all around the world. So today we are here because there is something which the famous film director Ken Loach called a monstrous injustice. So we have a man, a journalist, who published very important information with his media organization, WikiLeaks, information which has allowed to reveal horrific crimes, war crimes, torture, extrajudicial killings. And after revealing this information, after revealing these documents with us, with dozens of journalists around the world, in Italy, they work with L'Espresso and La Repubblica with me. In France, they work with Le Monde. In Germany, they work with Der Spiegel, they work with Süddeutsche Zeitung, they work with the State TV, ARD. In Britain, they work with The Guardian. In the US, with the New York Times, with the Washington Post. So we published what they published. And none of us had any problem. None of us were put in prison. None of us were even questioned by the police, by the judicial authorities. None of us had any trouble to this day. None of us has had any trouble. Whereas Julian Assange has never walked again as a free man. He ended up confined initially under house arrest in December 2010, then confined in an embassy, and then in what is the most tough British prison, Belmarsh, with dangerous criminals, with terrorists. He has been there since 11 April 2019, almost 3 years. What's his crime? To have published this important information, which has allowed to reveal war crimes and torture. And the very same information I published, and dozens of journalists in the world, I can see many of them here actually, publish as well. We never had any problem. He has never again known freedom. This is what Ken Loach, in his preface to my book called A Monstrous Injustice. So Stella, Joseph, and I want to reconstruct this case because we have been there from the very beginning. So if I had not been there, I wouldn't believe it. I mean, this is why newspapers pay you. They pay you to be here, to be a witness and to watch what happened and to reconstruct it and to investigate it. They pay for this reason. They want you as a witness to, to see and to investigate what's going on. If I had not been there from the very beginning, I couldn't believe that something like this might happen. And you know, what I have risked is nothing compared to what they risk and what Julian Assange has risked and is, you know, is going through. I'm pretty, I don't know, I'm pretty shocked about what I have seen. I'm pretty shocked. The treatment he has suffered is kind of treatment you expect in authoritarian states. In authoritarian states, you have this kind of situation. If you reveal their dirty secrets, the dirty secrets of the state criminality, this is really important. I didn't, before my work with WikiLeaks, let me explain you how it all started. So it all started in 2008 when one of my sources stopped talking to me. We had an appointment here in Italy, and she didn't show up. She didn't attend our meeting. She was convinced that she was under illegal interception. Of course, there is no way to know whether you are under illegal interception. It might be just a paranoia, or it might be real. And my source was convinced she was under illegal interception. So she didn't come. I have never ever known what she knew, because she never discussed it with me, as she was convinced that she was spied. So it was at that time, in 2008, when very, very few knew about WikiLeaks, that I realized I needed better source protection. Because, you know, we all use phones, we all use emails, but these technologies are old-fashioned. They belong to the 20th century. They are not suitable for the 21st century, where, you know, spies, corporate spies, the spies enrolled by big companies, and the state spies, the secret services, the law enforcement, the police, can intercept you, can get what you get in your phone, in your emails, very easily and very cheaply. So it was at that point that I realized I needed better source protection, because the old-fashioned techniques no longer work. So I'm a mathematician. By the way, I took my degree in these cities, in mathematics, so I knew what this strange thing, pretty, not really well-known cryptography was. So I told myself I want to try to use cryptography. And at that time, in 2008, no one knew how to use cryptography to protect sources. There was just a media organization in the world using cryptography, and that media organization was WikiLeaks. Not even the New York Times, not even the Washington Post, not even the Guardian. None of them were using encryption systematically to protect sources. So it was at that point that I realized that there was a media organization, and that media organization was the media organization of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, and I wanted to learn from them. So I established these contacts until one night they called me in the middle of the night, and they said, we have an audio file. We need some help to verify this audio file. It was July 2009. And we have done some kind of verification. We would like to ask you for help to verify these files as well. So we did this kind of work. It was the first time. And I was really impressed by WikiLeaks, not just because they could get files which no other media organization could get, like the Guantanamo the manual of Guantanamo, which, you know, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, had tried to get in every possible way. They tried with using freedom of information, they tried to litigate the freedom of information, and they were unable to get these files, and WikiLeaks got it. And I was impressed because they could get these secret documents that other media organizations could not. And not only that, I was impressed by them because when the Pentagon asked them to remove the files from their website, they said, no, we won't remove it. I mean, for me, it was pretty, you know, for me it was kind of hope, because after the 9/11, I could see how the media organization had become very, very, very close to the state, very, very willing to cooperate with the state. Let me give you just an example. The New York Times, for 13 years, the New York Times refused to use the word torture for the tortured. They call it enhanced interrogations. So you realize how these media are close to the establishment, to the government, how they are willing to obey to the state. And so for me, WikiLeaks telling the Pentagon, we won't remove the files. We will keep it online. It was something really important, really new. I said, they are very courageous. I want to know these people. So 13 years later, we are in a situation in which Julian Assange can disappear. If they can extradite him, we have a few days, and on the 20th of April, as his wife will tell you, and as Joseph will tell you, if the British justice will issue an extradition order. If they can extradite him, he will disappear in the US. He will put in a maximum security prison, and we won't see him again, just for publishing what we have published, we journalists have published, for revealing war crimes, for revealing horrific crimes. This is why we want to go through this story with you, and we hope we can expose how horrific this injustice, how monstrous this injustice. Let's go, let's try to hear from Stella Assange. No? What's up? Can we go ahead? Okay. Can we cannot see Stella. Go ahead with Joseph, because she's experiencing some troubles to connect. So let me introduce Joseph, because as I said, he's a journalist who has been there from the very beginning, and when Stella will connect, we will be able to question her. Joseph, let's start with the first publication, the publication for which Julian Assange and you all actually risk ending up in prison for life. These publications were the collateral murder, the documents on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the US diplomacy cables. Then I will tell you a story about these documents, and the documents on Guantanamo. They made the US military complex furious, and not just the US military complex. Can you tell us, can you reconstruct how furious they were?
Yeah, they were, as you say, it made them furious, and it would equally make other governments throughout the world furious if a similar thing happened. And I think the reason is, I remember when the Argentinian ambassador to London first met Julian, and her opening comment was, "Thank you. When people ask me about my country's contemporary history, I send them to WikiLeaks." Another journalist who's actually in this room said to me that they had spent 15 years as a journalist. They read newspapers cover to cover every day, 10 different papers. It was what they did all the time, and when they read the WikiLeaks cables, they had a completely different understanding of their own country's relations with other countries and what was going on, and how it never actually made it into the papers. So that was from the diplomatic cables, which showed all the nefarious dealings of states and interstate agreements. The Iraq war logs and the Afghan war logs showed the true cost of war, all the casualties, the civilian casualties that were not counted accurately, were not actually reported by the Department of Defense. It exposed, if you think of the cables, they are probably the greatest geopolitical, historic source of information that keep on giving. Still, you can use those cables to uncover stories, and stories still come out from them. So, and that was published 10 years ago.
12 years ago, actually.
12 years ago. And it's not inaccurate. It's all accurate information. This is what Julian is being prosecuted for.
Absolutely. I remember as a journalist when we got this information, I'm not sure they realized, it took a while to realize this as a journalist. I'm not sure whether the public realized that the power we see around us, it's just the tip of the iceberg. And there is a power which I call the secret power, which you can see. You cannot even perceive it as relevant for your life. You think that the power you see in the television and the newscast every day, in the political talk show, is all the power around you, the power which decides your life. Is not true. Most of the power, the most relevant power, is secret, and you don't perceive it. You don't even perceive it. But that power decides your life. For example, it decides if a country like Italy, which doesn't have the resources for good hospitals, for good schools, for good pensions, spends 20 years in Afghanistan for, we don't know for why we spent 20 years in Afghanistan. So it was thanks to these documents that for me as a journalist, for example, and I assume for all other journalists, we realized we could see this secret power, how it operates behind the scenes, how it put pressure on our politicians to be in Afghanistan, to stay there for many, many years and provide troops and resources when we didn't have resources for our social spending.
Or how for example, one of the cables is cited as being the reason that the Iraq war ended, because of the Iraqi government, after seeing that cable, which detailed how a homestead was bombed to cover up a failed operation, and how 5 children were handcuffed and then murdered, and 5 elderly women and 3 men, and how the Maliki government said, no more, we will not give any military immunity from prosecution. And it was after that Obama said, okay, we're pulling our troops out. It was made to look like he had left of his own volition, but it was because they had been given no further choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why they hate him, and he never have known freedom again. I mean, we could get these documents about Afghanistan, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we could compare the press release by the Pentagon, by our Ministry of Defense, and we could realize, compare the two versions of the stories, and realize how they lied, how they were just doing PR to make people. There is a wonderful document that they revealed about how to lie the French and German populations into the Afghan war, and using the propaganda argument that, well, if you don't stay in Afghanistan, women will be treated very badly by the Taliban once they go back to power. And so the French public opinion, which is sensible to this kind of argument, which cares about this kind of arguments, was impressed by these arguments. It was propaganda, and it was possible to expose this propaganda thanks to these secret documents. We could imagine, of course, that behind there was, secretly they were doing this kind of things. But it is one matter to imagine, to guess. It is another matter to have the evidence on the documents. And in fact, we never ever received not even a libel case. They absolutely didn't want to create any opportunity to go to the court and to question what they were doing secretly. They didn't want, absolutely. And I will tell you a story, a precise story. The story of Abu Omar, for example. Remember at the Julian Assange court hearing, how I explained how the cables allowed me to reveal how they had put pressure on the Italian authorities to grant impunity to the CIA. And in Germany, it was the...
Khaled al-Masri.
Exactly. Tell the story of Khaled al-Masri, maybe, and I will tell.
I think it's probably quite a well-known story, but Khaled al-Masri was a German citizen who was on holiday in, I think he was in Albania, or Macedonia. Macedonia. And he was picked up, rendered, sodomized, tortured, and then when they discovered that actually, when the CIA discovered that in fact it was a case of mistaken identity, he was dumped in Albania without any papers after having been detained for months. And it was the cables that he was able to use to actually get redress in the European courts for having been a victim of a rendition and a torture victim. Subsequent to that, there was pressure on the German government not to actually go any further with that case. But during Julian's hearing, his testimony was one of the expert witnesses, and it was the first time that a CIA torture victim had actually been, although he wasn't there presently, but had actually been in the same court as the US administration. And they moved heaven and earth to make sure that he wasn't able to phone in via video link. But his case is a matter of record now.
Yeah, the same with Abu Omar. I'm sure some of them are familiar with this case. Abu Omar was a citizen and asylum seeker at the time. He was based in Milan, and he was kidnapped in the middle of the day, yes, in Pinochet, you know. And he was kidnapped. He was brought to Egypt. He was badly tortured, very horrific torture. And our prosecutors, our wonderful Italian prosecutors, were able to nail all the CIA, 26 American citizens, almost all of them CIA agents, and they were able to identify them, to put them on trial, and to get a final sentence. These two wonderful prosecutors, Armando Spataro and Ferdinando Pomarici, got a final sentence. So they are convicted for kidnapping and torturing these persons, this human being, actually. So our justice was highly effective. Italy, I was proud. My country was the only country in the world which was able to do this, to identify them, the CIA agents, and to get a final sentence, to get a final sentence. You can come in my country and do whatever you want. You know, I was proud, the only country in the world which have done this. But these people never spent a single day in prison, never a single hour, actually. None of them spent a single day in prison. Why? Because six Italian justice ministers, never ever forwarded the arrest warrant to the US. So they granted impunity. So the only country in the world which had been able to nail the CIA agents actually ended up condemned by the European Court for Human Rights because it had granted impunity to the CIA agents after our prosecutors had done the work. So we could imagine, of course, that the US had put pressure on Italian politicians. Why on Italian politicians? Because they know that the Italian prosecutors are highly independent. So the only hope was the politics, to put pressure on Italian politicians. And they did. They put pressure on all of them. Enrico Letta, Clemente Mastella, they put pressure on Ignazio La Russia, they put pressure on all of them. And at the end of the day, they did succeed. They never spent a single day in prison. So we could imagine all this. We are adults. We realize that when these people don't go to prison, it's because the US authorities put pressure on Italian politicians. But thanks to the WikiLeaks documents, we got the evidence for the first time. They wrote these cables. They knew that it was not exposed, it would not surface. Maybe under 30 years, 40 years, when only historians would be interested. Who cares at that point? Whereas in this case, few years after they had done this, it was exposed. The documents allowed to reveal this. This is why they want to destroy Julian Assange and them, the WikiLeaks journalists.
It's not just the WikiLeaks journalists, it's or Julian Assange. He is the test case.
I agree.
He is the test case that once he gets, if he gets prosecuted and sent over, it will change national security reporting for everyone. Can you imagine? He's been detained since December 2010, a few days after he started publishing the cables.
Oh, we see Stella Assange. Please finish and we'll.
Since then, he has been detained. This is a journalist who has received the Index on Censorship Prize, the Amnesty International Prize, the Walkley Award. All the prizes that he has received for his journalistic work is the same reason he is being prosecuted. He has a huge following. He has behind him the editorial positions of all the mainstream newspapers like The Guardian, the New York Times, Der Spiegel. They are all against this extradition. He has the support of all the major NGOs, the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. By the way, there is an Amnesty group from Amnesty here who are doing a poll. So do, after this talk, come and put your vote in over here. If this is a man who has all of this, can you imagine what will happen to people who don't have awards and who don't have a big following and who aren't known? Can you imagine which any of you journalists will be easy? The test case will be done, the precedent will be set, and you'll be able to be extradited to any country that doesn't like something that you have written about them. It will set the precedent for you exposing some truths about Saudi Arabia, and they're just putting in an extradition request into your country to have you sent over there, or China, or Russia. After all, this is an Australian journalist who was practicing his journalism in Europe, and is being requested by the US under espionage charges. It's inconceivable, but it's gone on for years and years, and it's not just us.
Absolutely, I completely agree. It's all of us. I see many colleagues I see some colleagues who work, like the Spiegel colleague, now the Zeit colleague, who work on this document. All of us will be targeted. They start with him, but the WikiLeaks journalists will be the next, like Joseph, and we journalists for the mainstream will be the next, and all of us, and all other journalists who dare to expose their dirty secrets because they don't want. Absolutely. These secrets, as I said, and then I will, allow Stella Assange to intervene, of course. These secrets have nothing to do with the protection of citizens. These are dirty secrets about their crimes. These secrets are about state criminality. If you go around kidnapping people and torturing people or killing people with drones without no accountability, and no one can know what secret information they use to kill people, and they kill 9 out of 10 often are innocent, you know? So these are secrets, dirty secrets, which are not to protect people, you know? These are not secrets about a nuclear plant. These are not secrets about an airport, the security measure to protect an airport. These are secrets to protect state criminality and to grant impunity to the institution which commit these crimes, you know? So, Stella Assange, can you hear us? So Stella and Julian Assange married 2 weeks ago. They should be in honeymoon, whereas he's in Belmarsh, no? Among very dangerous criminals, and she is campaigning to free Julian Assange. Stella, can you tell us how Julian Assange is?
Well, for every day that passes, his health deteriorates further. On Monday will be 3 years of his incarceration in Belmarsh prison. He's, locked in his cell for many hours a day, and you can just imagine what kind of effect that has on a person. You can see the effect it has on animals in a zoo. Well, it's the same for people. His physical situation was already complicated when he was arrested because he had spent 7 years indoors inside a small apartment. But his range of movement has been reduced dramatically since then, and he's in a prison and surrounded by, very dangerous people, but also a prison that cannot address his needs. He had a mini stroke in October, and obviously that's a sign of his health dramatically deteriorating. He's only 50 years old. So there's the physical part, and then there's also the mental part, which is perhaps even more of a daily struggle, because this incarceration is so monstrous. And Julian has suffered from clinical depression his entire life, and we're very worried about him. But he's a fighter, and he's fighting every day. And he knows he needs to gather all his strength to face the next 6 to 12 months, which will be decisive in terms of deciding his fate and where this case goes, because of the stage of the appeals that we're now at. And I think we can go into that later. But it's also, I think, there's an interior fight to fight for his liberty and fight for what's right. And at the same time, there's an external fight, a fight against normalizing the normalization of Julian's incarceration, the normalization of this travesty that has been allowed to unfold completely illegally, a political attack on a publisher because of what he has published. And you know, we're determined to keep fighting until he's free, but it's not easy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the kind of tool used by the, again, is something which I wouldn't have believed. I did not follow this case very closely. I mean, you should know that the kind of tool the US is using against Julian Assange is the so-called Espionage Act, a World War I law, which basically put in the same box the spies who pass secrets to the enemy and people who revealed, you know, secret information exposing war crimes, exposing torture. So for this law, there is no difference. There is no difference between spies who pass the secrets to the enemies and are traitors, and there is, and the journalists and the sources who reveal the secret information to expose these state crimes. Stella, can you explain why? Because the Obama administration considered to incriminate Julian Assange for years, but at the end of the day, the Obama administration did not, whereas the Trump administration did. Could you explain why the Obama administration at the end of the day did not?
Well, there's a lot to unpack here, but firstly, in relation to the Espionage Act, why should we in Europe even care about the Espionage Act in the United States? I think for several reasons. The obvious one is Julian's case setting a precedent. As Joseph mentioned, he's not a US citizen. He wasn't working from the US. He wasn't publishing from the US. The Espionage Act is being applied extraterritorially into the jurisdiction of European states. As Stefania said, it's not just a law for spies who are spying for foreign states. It is worded so broadly that journalists for the past, since its inception really, have been fearing the day that it would be used against a publisher. Because I think it's important to clarify that even the US does not allege that Julian is a spy. They don't suggest that WikiLeaks was working for any foreign government or anything like that. In fact, the CIA branded WikiLeaks as a non-state hostile intelligence service, as they called it, which in other words is independent journalist organization, depending on your perspective, right? So what the US alleges is simply that WikiLeaks received from a source information obtained, possessed, and communicated that information to other journalists and to the public. There's no allegation there was any ulterior purpose than That's the US case. The US case is that Julian received information from a source, possessed it, and communicated it. And that is the wording of the Espionage Act. So why did the Obama administration not pursue this case? Well, there have been attempts for forever. There are elements within the U.S. security establishment that have been trying to curtail the First Amendment, curtail press freedoms in the U.S. Since forever. And they came very close to doing that with the Pentagon Papers 50 years ago, with the New York Times and the Washington Post. But they decided not to. And they came very close during the Obama years with Julian, and also in the case of James Risen, I think, who they labeled as an unindicted co-conspirator with his source. So there have been edging closer and closer to it. During the Obama years, there was an investigation. A grand jury was established in 2010. But the Obama administration ultimately concluded that they were not going to pursue this case. And in fact, one of their the DOJ spokesperson during the Obama administration said explicitly why. He said, we've investigated this, and there's no way of prosecuting Julian Assange and WikiLeaks without this having legal implications for the rest of the press, because we would have to go after him as a publisher and as a journalist. So we're not going to do that. And then he added, this Matthew Miller, DOJ spokesperson, he added, Julian Assange is a publisher, he's not a hacker. So we're not going to go after him as a publisher. That was a position of the Obama administration. It was made explicit with Matthew Miller's statement, and also with the commutation of Chelsea Manning's sentence. What happened? Well, a new administration came in, which had an anti-media agenda, and basically seized this, resurrected a case that had been dropped in order to set the precedent that the Obama administration did not want to set. They have gone after Julian, the Trump administration went after Julian as a publisher, not as a whistleblower, not as a source, as a publisher. And that is possible because of the wording of the Espionage Act. It was a political decision. The wording, the legislation has already been there. This draconian legislation has been there since 1917, but the political climate changed, which made it possible to go after the press. And in fact, we've found out through leaks and reports that there was a meeting between Trump and the FBI director, James Comey, in which they said they wanted to put a head on the pike in relation to the media. They wanted to be able to prosecute journalists, and Julian's case is that head on a pike.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to show some of the things they did against all of us inside the embassy. Per favore, potete mettere i video e le foto che vi ho dato? Let's see if they... Ecco. This is how we were spied inside the embassy. This is me meeting Julian Assange. All our meetings and conversations were basically filmed and recorded. I didn't know, of course. We could imagine something, some kind of surveillance, but they filmed us, our meetings, and they recorded our meeting. Then I want to show you what they did to my phones inside the embassy. They took my phones and recorders, and they took this picture secretly. I didn't know. I was meeting Julian Assange in a room, in a conference room, and they opened my backpack secretly, they got access to these devices, to my devices. There is a cryptophone, an encrypted phone. There is a dumb phone, which is a phone which is not smart. Yeah. They got access secretly to all my stuff. Please, let's go ahead, okay? This is my USB sticks, and they unscrew my phones. I don't know why, I don't know what they were looking for, but they opened my phone, they unscrew it and took pictures. All this was done in secret. And this was done to me, to other journalists. I was heavily targeted, and others were. To them, they were recorded, they were filmed. And Stella will tell you what happened to her and to their children, to their child, the first child she had with Julian Assange, Gabriel. Stella, can you tell us?
Yes, I mean, this was just the tip of the iceberg, right? We didn't know at the time what was happening, what was being done, but we have found out because whistleblowers came forward who were conducting the espionage and revealed that they were doing so, their company was doing so for the CIA. They were receiving instructions which are now in the hands of Spanish courts and investigators, which included obtaining the DNA of our infant child, who was just 6 months old, by stealing a nappy when I came in with our baby to see, so that our child could see his father. You know, it was an extremely dangerous time, and we could just feel this instinctively. And what we know now, apart from the information that we've learned through the Spanish legal process and the members of this security company that was working for the CIA, is that at the same time the CIA was planning, was deploying a large ranging attack on Julian and WikiLeaks. And this spying was one element of it. They were developing plans, specific sketches and plans about how to assassinate Julian inside the embassy, kidnap him, rendition him. And this was happening in 2017, 2018, while Pompeo was heading up the CIA. And we know that these plans were discussed at the highest levels of the Trump administration, and that they also deployed a wide-ranging disinformation campaign as part of that attack. But you know, I go on for a long time in relation to all the actions that were taken against us. The lawyers who had legal meetings had their notebooks photographed, and those photographs have then appeared on the hard drives of this security company that was working for the CIA. Julian's entire legal archive was seized after he was arrested from the embassy, and that was shipped to the United States. So there's the activities that have been taken against Julian and against us, his family, against his lawyers, against his friends, are completely criminal. We're living in a completely inverted reality where the criminals are allowed to abuse the law and persecute the publisher and everyone around him, and violate sacred protections, legal protections, in order to further this political persecution. And not only are they taking illegal actions in order to further the political persecution, it is their illegal actions during the Iraq and Afghan wars and in Guantanamo Bay of torture and illegal killings and so on that Julian exposed.
Yes, this is the real problem. The criminals never had any trouble, never spent a day in prison, and the journalists who reveal their crimes never known freedom again. This is in an upside-down world. This is why we should rebel, we should protest, we should stop his extradition, you know? We cannot accept that the criminals are free as the air while the journalists and the sources who expose these crimes have their life destroyed, because they have their life destroyed. Chelsea Manning, who passed these documents to WikiLeaks, has spent 8 years in prison and tried to commit suicide 3 times. Julian Assange has spent 12 years, his entire life, you know, for exposing these criminals. How can we be silent? How can we be accept? I mean, this kind of situation you expect in a regime. In a regime, you expect something like this. If you reveal state criminality at the highest level in a regime, in China, in Russia, in North Korea, in wherever, you expect this situation. You go to jail, or they send you killers, they kill you. But this is, the treatment of Julian Assange is just less brutal, just less brutal, but it's the same. He has never known freedom, It's just the same. I want to ask Stella, how do you explain, how do you explain to your small kids, to the 2 small kids you had with Julian Assange, that in a few months he might be extradited to the US and they could not see him again?
I don't explain that to them because I'm very determined to fight for his freedom, and I think that this case is so preposterous and so outrageous that there are if the law works as it should, extradition cannot go through. But the reality is that, of course, this is a political case. The US has intervened. Julian won the extradition case initially. The UK blocked it, and then the US intervened politically, issuing what it called guarantees, which were completely vague and unenforceable, and also incorporated the exception to the guarantee inside the wording. So the UK has in fact and the US are in fact in violation of their bilateral extradition treaty, which prohibits extraditions for political offenses. Of course, espionage is the political offense by definition, and so the UK government could stop this at any time, not just during the period in which Priti Patel is, considering greenlighting it, but at any time, because what they are doing goes explicitly against the wording of the treaty. And I think it's important to emphasize that what's happening to Julian corrupts the entire system of rule of law, of protection against journalists generally. This is what we mean when it sets a precedent. If it's done against Julian, it can be repeated. It's very difficult to do it the first time. And that's why Julian's case should never be talked about as an exception, because it's not. He's being prosecuted for journalistic activity. He's not being prosecuted as a whistleblower. He's being prosecuted as a publisher. You know, Julian is an accredited journalist, whether some people don't like it or not. I mean, whether some people like it or not, he is an accredited journalist. And the government of any country has no place in defining a person not as a journalist for the purposes of prosecution and persecution, which the United States has done here. And generally, what we have is the United States, which has been kind of the gold standard of press freedom, of freedom of speech, now taking the most deranged, outrageous attack on a publisher, and exerted that attack extraterritorially to a foreign publisher inside Europe. And Julian faces 175 years in the United States for journalistic activity. And this then sets a standard, a global standard, about going after journalists anywhere. And, you know, if you are a journalist publishing about a foreign country or your own, people, you know, the government will invoke these kinds of reasonings, because if the United States does it, then the whole international system of press freedoms is engaged in a race to the bottom. And you see it with the president of Azerbaijan and China and Russia and Belarus and so on, using the Assange case as a way to talk about Western hypocrisy in part, but also as a way of licensing their own treatment of their own journalists, their own prosecutions and persecutions of their own journalists and their own dissidents.
Joseph, do you want to add something?
No.
Okay, I want to add something. This is not just about a human being, a journalist, and about journalists in general. This is also about the public. Because, you know, it's really important that the public can look, can know about the secret power, can realize that the power they see every day in the TV newscasts and in newspapers is just the tip of the iceberg. And behind it, there is much more. And these people are operating in full secrecy, and you have no right to know. And for the first time, WikiLeaks made possible to access this information, not after 30 years, 40 years, where no one cared, you know, because it's too late. It's not useful for daily life after 40 years. No one cares anymore after 40 years. So it's not just about the right of the publishers, the journalists, and so on. It's about the right of the public to know. We have the right to know what they do in our name. Behind the scenes, in secrecy, we have the right to know if they kill in our names, if they unleash terrible wars. We have the right to know, we have the right to say, I don't want to spend 20 years in Afghanistan when we don't have the money for hospitals. We don't have the money for schools. We don't have the money for pension, for decent pension. But to be able to tell these things, to be able to interact and to participate, we have to have access to this secret information. And the secrecy, in this case, has nothing to do with the protection of the public. It's all about their impunity. It's all about protecting these state criminals and grant them impunity and to keep them free as the air when they commit crimes. So this case is not just about us, the journalists, or about them, the WikiLeaks journalists, or about Julian Assange. This case is about you, your right to know, your right to know what is important for your life, for the future of your community. You know, what's your interest? To spend 20 years in Afghanistan to do nothing and to kill civilians, or to have good schools and good hospitals, you know? You have to be able to access this information, and this information is denied to you because it's covered by secrecy, a secrecy which has nothing to do with security. So it's your right to know. You have to be upset and very angry about this case. Thank you. Thank you, Stella.
Don't forget to go to the amnesty box and put your vote in, which is just over here on the left.
And the book, if you are interested in my book as well, and the amnesty box.